Hi everyone, Anthony Vise Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new album from Spelling and the Mystery School. Spelling. For those who are uninitiated, what can be said about Spelling? It is a West Coast music project that is spearheaded by composer, songwriter, singer, producer, multi-instrumentalist, Christia Cabral. As Spelling, with her band, she made my favorite album of 2021, The Turning Wheel, a musical experience that sounds like a radical, naturalistic, future witch utopia, which is wrapped in the shiny, perfectly arranged layers of instrumentation that, among many other reasons, is why this record got the rare privilege of receiving a 10 out of 10 score from me. And after a release like this, I presumed it would be a long time before we heard from Spelling again, especially considering all of the touring that shortly followed this record, and all the artistic evolution Christia had to undergo between this and her last album, Maisie Fly. If you listen to both, they're such incredibly different records, it's crazy that they came from the same person in such a short span of time, because Maisie's sparse and eerie, dark wave-inspired instrumental palettes are such a far cry away from the mystical art pop of The Turning Wheel. And obviously a lot of that change sits on Christia's shoulders and the way she has evolved as an artist. But this current phase for Spelling is also very much about this new range of instruments in the mix, and don't forget about the people who play them too, which is where Spelling and the Mystery School comes in. Because this album isn't just about Christia recreating the musical world in her mind. This project here is much more about the creative chemistry she has with her band. The way they've been able to re-envision certain Turning Wheel tracks since taking them out on the road, and also retool older Spelling material from records that are just much more stripped back. The whole front end of this album is just reworks of songs from Maisie Fly and Pantheon of Me, which some of you may shrug your shoulders at that and think, well, what's the big deal? These are just old songs. But these new versions make them worth hearing again, I promise you. Because Christia and her band make them sound as ornate and beautiful as any song off of The Turning Wheel. It's just a crazy and kind of moving evolution to hear Walk Up to Your House, for example, go from this very simple vocal and synth meditation to this full display of weepy strings, passionate lead vocals, steady rock drums. The layered vocal chants hit hard too. It's like hearing a new song entirely, or like hearing this one the way it was originally meant to be done if Spelling had the capability to earlier. So there's that, and there's also moments on this thing like Under the Sun, which honestly was an amazing single when I first heard it. That track was one of the first that really kind of hooked me on Spelling to begin with. And this new rendition is a different vibe. It sounds less eerie and less haunted in a way, but now that it's all decked out in pianos and strings and driving kicks, there's a fiery and exciting momentum to it that just kind of gives it new life, which I would also say is the case for They Start the Dance. There's a sick delay-soaked vocal breakdown at the midpoint, along with a string crescendo at the very finish of the song that's nuts. Christia is taking so many creative liberties with her own material on this thing. It's just sounding super refreshing, radically different, and that's stellar. And then there's new versions of tracks on this thing that feel a bit more familiar. Haunted Water, for example, which very much maintains its very slow intro synth arpeggios. Even if it is clearly enhanced, it very much feels like the same song. And I love that it's able to maintain that familiarity while launching slowly into this heavy, prog-leaning ghost rock jam. Hard to Please is another pretty key Spelling single that is years old at this point, and on this record it's reimagined in a way that is bright and hopeful and warm, despite the futile position Christia finds herself in at the end of the track, where the love she's singing about seems to be unrequited. Still, no amount of words can truly explain how radically different this arrangement makes the track feel in terms of emotional vibe. My least favorite of the older cuts featured on this Mystery School record has to be Cherry, which originally was already one of the more repetitive and one-dimensional Spelling tracks, and I don't think this redo does enough to bring more variation into the song and really pull out its full potential. Now, the final several tracks on this record are pretty much Turning Wheel songs that many fans at this point are already familiar with: Boys at School, Always, Revolution, and the closer to the Turning Wheel, Sweet Talk. And this is where the record, I believe, begins to lose a bit of direction and purpose, because these songs already kind of represent the new version and sound of this project. There's not as much retooling to be done with them. However, it still does feel like we're hearing at least some of the alterations that Christia and the band have been working on since performing these songs live. Look, I will say Boys at School should go down as one of the best songs of this decade. Hearing it in any context is great. Presenting it in a much more intimate way on this record that leans a bit less into the synths and electronics and also brings a punchier drum performance, that's interesting. Pretty powerful as well. I'm never going to say no to listening to this track. But then there's Always and Revolution, which, like I said earlier, kind of sounds like some live studio stuff, like a KEXP or Tiny Desk performance, or a very small live show. And even though I do appreciate small additions like the sick guitar solo on Revolution, I don't know if I would rather listen to these versions over the originals in any context, really. However, I will say this new rendition of Sweet Talk is kind of a surprise. Hearing the vocals on this one in a more naked context with a stronger rhythm section and the ascending and descending melodies unfolding in a somewhat slower and more dramatic way, there is something about that. But I don't know if the song works as well as a finisher for what is essentially like a compilation in a way of reworks. I think Small Talk made a lot more sense as Christia's epilogue-esque statement on her attraction to music itself at the end of the Turning Wheel. Maybe it's something emotionally she feels is worth restating because it still stands as true at the end of this album. But honestly, I would have rather had this space allotted to a stronger Turning Wheel song or even an older Spelling track that got yet again reworked into something more grand, ambitious, and lavish. Overall, while I may not be in love with this record, I thought it was an interesting experiment and little detour for Christia, Spelling, the band. I think it captures a really cool little snapshot in her artistic evolution for the fans, and it makes me look forward even more to see where the wheel starts turning next. I'm feeling decent to strong 7 on this one. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Spelling, forever.